Well, General Petraeus called this person an inspiring and courageous figure. There were members of ISIS who were heard calling him the Black Devil. He's one of the main subjects of PBS Frontline's exceptionally good recent documentary called Once Upon a Time in Iraq. And for several years since 2014, he was known only as Mosul Eye, the anonymous historian behind the website, the man who ISIS leaders wanted captured or dead, the man who lived next door to some of those leaders, even as he kept his blog chronicling the tragedy taking place in his city, and also informing the world, and also giving hope to his fellow citizens in Mosul. So a few years ago, he revealed his identity to the world, and it's for that reason I can say that it's my great honor to welcome to the TheCommonToad podcast the man behind Mosul Eye, Omar Mohammed. Thank you very much for being on tonight.
Thank you for hosting me. The honor is all mine. And as I just told you a few minutes ago before we start recording, I have this feeling that I feel safer speaking when it's late in the night. It's probably because I used to report against ISIS during this time. I don't know if they were sleeping, but it was my moment of clarity while I put Isaac Perelman's music on and start writing. Like, the writing wasn't only on one level, like I record things handwriting, I write them handwriting with my on papers, and then I do a kind of like a careful selection of what should be published and what should be what should remain hidden, because in that time the idea of keeping your sanity, the idea of remaining sane person, that you can make real critical decisions, that one piece of information could lead to your death. So it was kind of like a very difficult intellectual process that you should make. It's much harder than putting on tens of cows on your shoulders and taking them to the 10th floor. It's much tiring than this.
Yes, I want to ask you too about the difference between what it was like to be out in the city versus the nights that you, as you were saying, came back to your own home and had to deal with the fact that you were Mosul Eye and nobody knew it but you. But before we do that, I would like to start by just asking you to just give a brief general introduction as to what kinds of things you were born. Were you born in the city of Mosul? Were you a native to it?
I mean, as far as I know, and also based on the research I did on my family, we actually belong to a very old generation in the city. We have very deep roots in the city of Mosul, especially in the old part of the city, which was the oldest section of the city of Mosul, as it was known historically. I was born in 1986. 1986. Yes, that's correct. My father was in the battlefield during the Iraqi-Iranian war, like just 2 years before the end of the war. The day I was born, my father had a car accident after he received the information that I was born. So it's kind of like a remarkable history for me. But because he was happy, and he keeps reminding me of this, like I had a car accident.
That's quite an introduction to the world.
Yeah,
causing an accident.
Yeah, please stop reminding me of this accident. Yeah, and this is like I spent my whole life in the city of Mosul. I studied there. Yeah, I grew up like any other Mosuli person, but with much more interest in the heritage and history of the city because my family had this connection in the city. It had this connection, like because the city of Mosul represents a very complicated social formation, especially the role of families in the city. That families have a certain social, political, and economical role in the city. So when you belong to a certain family that it was known for certain role, especially my maternal side, they have this kind of like long history of being practitioners in traditional medicine. So it's quite a history that you should always be making this kind of connection for yourself. Um, it's also funny that the next generation, which was my parents, her father was my mother's father, who was grandfather. He was a communist, a friend of Mullah Mustafa al-Barazani, the well-known Kurdish leader who is the father of the current Masoud Barzani. He fought with the Kurds against the dictatorship. He was a very strong communist. He was also a member of Mahabad Republic, which is the first Kurdish republic. While on my father's side, they were Arab nationalists. They had this idea of nationalism, a very strong nationalism and nationalist ideas. And imagine that a person like me grow up between those two ideas. They contradict each other. They are against each other.
Yes.
And I grow up with this. So I grow up in a house where you can read the book of, for example, Karl Marx. At the same time, you read the books of the most fundamentalist and Arab nationalist.
Yes. So you couldn't stray too far in one direction. The other side would pull you back.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the advantages that you are in this kind of family, that you don't take side, but
Yeah.
you get the knowledge that it becomes your, if I would say, it becomes your protection, that you don't rely on only one side, but rather you decide to go further and to find the truth your way.
Yeah. So when the United States and coalition forces came into Iraq in 2003, what were you doing in Mosul at that time?
Well, I mean, before they came, I was waiting for. Probably you have heard this story. I was waiting for the year to 18 to be announced that I am officially 18 years old, because it's related to a story when I was in my primary school. I mean, I am a very curious person. I ask lots of questions. I question things. I don't believe things easily. So this is what I was doing as a child in the primary school. I was telling my teacher, like, what you are saying doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
And I asked her further questions, and I wanted her to clarify what she was talking about. And then I was kind of like stopped, and she told me in a very like strong tone that you shouldn't ask questions. You are just a child. When you become an adult, that you are an 18 years old, then you will be able to ask questions. But now you should only listen.
Yes.
Because like this is kind of like, again, back to the social structure and the social formation. Children are taught to respect. I wouldn't call it respect, but to follow the orders of the older people. This is what we were taught.
Yeah.
You have to say yes to whatever has been said to you from someone who is older than you. And we have this kind of like also the proverb that says a person who is 1 year older than you, he is 1 year knowledgeable than you. So you have to always be in this kind of system. So I started counting the years, I didn't know. I was just a child. I went to the bookstore and I bought a calendar, thinking that this would give me a better help to count the years when I become an adult. And 1 year, just 1 year before I become an adult, the Americans came. I was 17 years old. They occupied Iraq they launched the operation in March 23rd, and they occupied Baghdad on April 9th and Mosul on April 10th, which was Friday. I was on the streets with other people because the Baathists left over everything behind them. They left everything. They left all the checkpoints, etc. And you know that in the Islamic countries, Friday is a holy day for the Friday ceremony. And the preacher of the mosque, who used to pray for Saddam every Friday, I know that he was forced to do this, because if he doesn't say these kind of prayings for Saddam, he would be killed. So, I mean, it was shocking to me that the same person who was every Friday saying like, may God protect Saddam and protect the people and protect the Republic of Iraq, and he started all of these kind of like slogans against the Crusaders, the Americans, the Israelis, like it's a very long list of like really tiring and annoying concepts and terms. And on that day, it seems to me, I mean, after I was growing up and I started like looking back into things, that he wasn't aware that the Americans actually were approaching Mosul. So he was still thinking that Saddam is still there. That's why on that day he was still praying for Saddam. But all of a sudden, after a Humvee approached the street with few soldiers and a tribal man from Mosul, approached the mosque, and they stopped by the mosque. All of a sudden, that person who was praying for Saddam, he started shouting, "It's the day of freedom. May God send Saddam to hell. Go to hell, Saddam."
He was a true professional.
Yes, I mean, he wasn't aware that the Americans were there, and probably someone told him when they arrived, like, look, the Americans are here. Stop praying for Saddam. So he started doing this, and it was shocking to me because I didn't know what was happening.
Yeah.
And I saw those American soldiers who, to me, were coming out of like a Hollywood film, because this is what I used to see, like a soldier equipped with all of these like heavy weapons, with all of these guns. He's just, I never thought that this is real.
What a strange experience that.
Yes, I never thought that this is real. I never thought that I would see Rambo in reality. I thought that Rambo is only in films.
And what were your elders thinking and reacting at that time?
My father helped me understand the situation, because he was in Baghdad at that time, and then he left Baghdad and came back to Mosul, and he started talking. It's the first time I see my father speaking freely without like putting the notion of the walls have ears.
Yeah.
It's the first time like the walls are no more having ears. So my father started explaining it's the fall of Saddam, it's the fall of the regime, the fall of the Ba'athis that controlled Iraq for all of these years, and he started talking about their crimes, etc. And it became kind of like much easier for me to understand, although my family didn't support the occupation, but as many other families, they welcomed the idea that Saddam is gone.
Yeah. So in the intervening, say 7 years, intervening 9 years.
Yes.
Between that time and by the time ISIS came in 2014, what were you doing then? Did you experience a mix of violence, of opportunity, or?
Well, starting, I mean, Mosul has this kind of like special place in the history of modern Iraq, especially after the fall of Saddam. It has this history of being the place where the terrorism actually was formed. AKI, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, other jihadist groups, they were all formed in Mosul for many reasons. I mean, it's difficult to explain all the reasons now, but for many reasons, this city was the headquarters of establishing the terrorist groups. Whether they call it resistance, I don't call it resistance. It wasn't resistance for all the crimes they've committed. I mean, a resistance, we didn't kill Iraqis. I mean, it's also resistance would form kind of like a political, whatever means they have, but they move toward the means of establishing an alternative. Yeah. But they didn't seem to have any alternative but violence. Starting from 2004, actually, the daily life of Mosul became it became a day of horror. Like every day, you would find clashes between the Americans and the terrorists, kidnappings, car bombs, IED, this kind of like explosive devices on the side road, and the fear was controlling. The fear was the only atmosphere. Yeah. Which led me and many other people like myself to start creating a different, or if I can call it an alternative life, an alternative space, a space that those terrorists or this violence cannot reach.
How did you do that?
It's very difficult when you are very young and you are supposed to live a normal life, given that all of this past and history of violence that your parents have endured, like the Iraqi-Iranian war, the Kuwait war. My father was a victim of the war. He was injured, heavily injured, and he's still suffering from the Iraqi-Iranian war. I mean, given all of this, like history of violence, add to that the horrible decision that I made, that I started loving history. And I started reading about the history of Iraq, which brought much more violence to my visual memory than what I have already known from my parents. Because when you read history, you gain new knowledge of things that, I mean, it comes to your life as a reality.
Yes.
You cannot avoid it. So this is how the daily life became. But I found peace when I went to college. And this started in 2007, sorry. I found peace when I went to college, when I started visiting the library. It seemed to me that at that time, although the terrorists, they had access to the university actually, and they killed my professor in my first year of studying at the University of Mosul. My major was history, and I was studying the Arabic and Islamic manuscripts. And this was the only teacher who actually teaches the Islamic manuscripts and how to read them, how to edit the manuscripts. And I was one of his, as he said, may his soul rest in peace, that I was one of his brilliant students because I was eager to learn more about manuscripts. But all of a sudden, while I was preparing for my exam, and I brought the examples of the manuscripts he gave us in order to write them in a readable font. When I brought this to the university, I found out that he was assassinated by Al-Qaeda. Yeah. So I mean, this is how things like started extremely changing in my life. Although there was daily violence, but sometimes this violence or the reflection of this violence gives you, again, as I said in the beginning, it gives you protection against this violence, that you start protect yourself from falling in this kind of trap. The university and its place in my life started growing. I was introduced to many professors at the university, and I was introduced to a scholar who was studying Orientalism, and he was one of the only people who actually studies Orientalism in Mosul, because Orientalism is kind of like, it's a crime at that time. If you study or you talk about Orientalism, then they assign you to colonialism, to crusaders, all of these kind of things, because they don't know what Orientalism is, or probably they have only read the book of Edward Said, if they have ever read the book. Anyway, so I mean, with all of these ideas, I became, like, in my early life at the college, a member of the Center for Orientalism Studies. I was still a student, a college student, and I started contributing to this. My English language started getting better. I started reading in English. I started educating myself more and more. And then I went to study the French expedition on Egypt, which actually was the only example that gave me answers to the fundamental question that I used to ask myself since I was 17 when the Americans first arrived, is why they are here, what they are doing, why the hell someone leaves his family, all of this, like, space between, like, distance, and comes to Iraq.
Yes.
Because I've spoken to many American soldiers, and I thought that, I mean, in my mind, when I was young, I thought that being a soldier, it means you are a lonely person. You don't have any other kind of things. You are a different person from what we call them the normal people, because you are a soldier. So I thought that all the American soldiers have no families, have no children. They are just like robots.
Did they have an answer to your question?
Yeah, they did. But when I started asking them, like, I still remember this. I wish that he would hear this video, and that he can, that he's still alive and he's still safe. His name is Josh. He was Josh, and I asked him. He said, I have 2 children. He was from, I remember that he was from California or something like that. And the funny thing is, like, about Josh, you know, there's a funny story. The people, because, you know, the Americans, they used to do checkpoints in the neighborhoods. So their checkpoint was in front of our house. So we would sit with Josh and we speak with him. We give him, like, apples sometimes, grapes, like we communicate with him. His name Josh, the pronunciation of this name Josh is the same pronunciation or a close pronunciation to the name of the donkey in Arabic, Jash.
Okay, yes.
You see? Yes. So the people used to call him Jash instead of Josh, and he wouldn't know what this means. So when they were saying this, they were laughing, and I felt sorry for Josh.
Poor Josh.
Then I told him, like, Josh, they are not calling you your real name. They are calling you a donkey.
They're calling you a donkey.
Then he was aware of this, and he said,
you had to break the bad news to him.
Yeah, I wanted him to know that they are making fun of him, and he didn't deserve this. So this is kind of like one part of the interaction that I had with the American soldiers. But sometimes you would see, like, really violent soldiers who crash other cars or break houses like in the middle of the night. I mean, I have seen the both sides, I would say. Yeah. I mean, this was the I wouldn't call it normal life, to be honest. I mean, this was the abnormal life that we have lived.
So during this whole time, there's a mix of violence on the side of the American soldiers. There's the terrorist response. Meanwhile, you're trying to get yourself educated in the university. And you eventually did graduate, right, before 2014?
Yeah, I didn't only graduate, but I also started teaching at the university. I mean,
yeah.
my dream was to be a teacher. Sorry, I believe that the philosophy, the Greek philosophy in its beginning was based on the idea of teaching. It's like you have a teacher and a student.
Yeah.
And this is how philosophy was established. That's why I love teaching, because I feel like it's important for me to keep seeking knowledge. If you are no more teaching, if you have just finished your studies, you will find yourself like, why would I learn more? I am fine, it's done. But when you are a teacher and you feel like that you have a responsibility, you would always want to know more in order to transfer this knowledge to the next generation. That's how I feel like the teaching is an essential element of our life, whether it's the ancient life, the ancient history, the contemporary, modern, medieval, etc. It's based on the idea of teaching. And even, like even in the religious perspective, the prophet has also another name. He is a teacher. He's teaching his followers. So like it's about teaching. God, in the Islamic perspective, he started teaching through his angels the humans, when he say, like in one of the phrases in Quran, and he sent Gabriel to teach the names of everything to Adam. So you see, like the idea of teaching is essential to humanity, and that's what I was doing, and I was so happy and eager to start teaching this. But this kind of like teaching is stopped when the so-called Islamic State came in June 2014.
So June 2014, how quickly or how suddenly did the Islamic State, so-called, come in to Mosul and take over? Was it something that you and the people around you saw coming? Did you know it was going to happen? Was there some question as to whether or not it would actually come all the way into the city, or was it an
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, there are two important points need to be clarified here, because I read in the media that ISIS took over Mosul during 3 days, and that the occupation of Mosul took 3 days for ISIS to occupy the whole territory of Mosul. The reality is, the attack was launched on 3 a.m. June 6th, 2014. Mosul is under control of the Islamic State by 11 a.m. It's done.
Right. So,
but the media like moves toward like other kind of elements. They say like because it's established, etc. No, it's started 3 a.m. It's done. The battle is done 11 a.m. That's it.
So it was that fast.
Yes, everything is done. They didn't even shoot a bullet on the eastern side of the city of Mosul. Everything was clear for them. They took over everything.
So they had, so people knew they were coming, and just whatever security forces were in there.
Yes, we were expecting this to happen.
Yeah. Okay.
But not in this forum, not in this situation, not in this shape.
Right.
Because for a simple reason, 1 week before ISIS occupied Mosul, there was another attack by another group. It's called Al-Naqshbandi Order Army, the Sufis, who are actually the Ba'athists, the former Ba'athists. They occupied Mosul for 24 hours, which is the normal thing that used to happen since 2011, since the Americans left. They occupied Mosul for maximum 48 hours, and then everything's gets back to normal. So we thought that this is also another attack of like temporary occupation of Mosul, and everything will be back to normal. Exams weren't actually delayed in the university. Everything like they didn't stop life, and they thought that like life is going to go back to normal. And we were also fooled by the governor of Mosul, who appeared in the middle of the night on the next day, on the 7th, and he said, those fighters of freedom are here to bring back the power, to give it to the righteous people of Mosul. And everyone believed him, like, are they freedom fighters or are they terrorists, etc. But what we are seeing are terrorists. I mean, they are not, they have nothing to do with freedom.
Yeah.
So there was this kind of confusion during those 3 nights that followed the major attack, which I just told you. It started 3 a.m., ended 11 a.m., and that's it.
And then how long did it take for you to realize that this wasn't just going to be part of the normal path?
On June 13th, only after a few days, it's a week. I mean, on June 13th, it's after a week, when they distributed what they called it the charter of the city or constitution of the city, which is ISIS so-called constitution of how they are going to rule the city. I realized, like, at this moment, no, those guys are different. They are here to stay. They established their media stations, because this brought back to me when Napoleon came to Egypt and Cairo. The first thing he did, he brought his printing press, and he cared about the media more than anything else.
Yep.
So when you have this tool with in your hands, and you come to a city occupied or a country, it means clearly that you are here to occupy the city, and you are different from those who are used to occupy Mosul for a temporary and a short time. So from that time, I realized that yes, those people are different. They have different equipment. They are well organized. They started like they brought everything necessary with them. The what's related to media, the media stations, the propaganda, the books, the leaflets, etc. Like they had thousands of them.
And so I think for some of us in America and the so-called West and everything, have a annoying habit, those of us who grow up in relative peace, to look back either in history or contemporary events that are violent, and just they can't quite believe it's the same world that they're living in. You know, they have a hard time understanding what it would even, they can't bring their head to that point where it would,
yes.
You know, and so I'm trying to understand in your mind, who grew up with, you know, all through your childhood, with some level of disruption and violence. I'm wondering what was the moment for you when you decided that, okay, they're here to stay, but more than that, I need to do something to resist it. I'm not going to just sit at home and just let whatever happens. I'm actually going to take steps that it's going to require a lot of courage, and I'm just going to do it. What was it that made you make that decision?
You know, what made me make this decision? Two reasons. One is the history. I explained to you in the beginning that I come from a family that has two intellectual sides. One is communism, and the other is Arab nationalism. And when I started reading the history of Mosul witnessed a massacre in 1957-58. And when you read about these massacres that happened also in 1936, a massacre against the Assyrians, and other massacres probably weren't documented in the history. I was so much concerned that the same will happen again, that this time it's also going to be removed from our history, and the people of the future will be blinded from now. Like you will set the rules from now that the next generation should be blind from what happened. So I was so afraid that the next generation will not know what happened. And this idea that imagining a person like me in the future sitting on his table and reading the history of Mosul and doesn't know what really happened in 2014, just like me when I try to understand what happened in 1936 and 1958. So
That's,
this kind of
that's very interesting. So it was the feeling of horror that future generations might be ignorant to the reality and the suffering of people today.
Absolutely. That's the main concern that I had. I forgot all the risks. I forgot all the craziness of making this decision, and I cared about the future. Because after all, history is not about the past. History is about the future. Because who he writes, the narrative, the first narrative, controls the future.
Yes.
If you don't have authority over the narrative, you cannot control the future. And this was my battle with ISIS, is like whose narrative should have the authority. So ISIS decided to take this risk in order to give the next generation the room to read what really happened, to know names, events, dates, things exactly as they happen, not like what I am suffering now. Like, I don't know, probably people are living among us and they are considered as heroes, but in the past, in 1958, they were criminals.
Yes. Yeah. So we should say too, for people who aren't as familiar, I mean, Mosul Eye became this website, this blog, which detailed, as you say, names the actual events that were taking place, changes to the city day by day, right? And ISIS had quite a lot of control over the city, but apparently you still had internet access and you were able to publish these things online.
Yes, I mean, this was the craziest part of the story of Mosul Eye. In the beginning, ISIS didn't have this much control over the internet, because you could still have access to the internet through the providers, the internet providers in the city. But later on, they started asking the providers of internet for information about their customers. So every customer should fill out an application, and this application includes your social media accounts, your passwords. You should give everything.
Yeah.
So since I had a friend of mine who runs a small company as an internet provider, I kind of like paid him more in order to create a fake application with fake social media accounts that I had to create.
Wow.
Because if they don't find the social media account, it means like there is something suspicious. So I had to create these fake accounts and fill out the application with fake information, fake data, and give it to him so he can deliver it back to ISIS. And with this way, I would run away with the internet. But this wasn't the only problem. It was the other and the most serious problem is the cybersecurity. How can I protect myself online?
Yeah.
With ISIS having all of this kind of like technologies that they can trace people and they discover or expose their IP, or they hack their accounts, etc. So I kind of like started reading on a website known as Arab Cybers, which is a website dedicated to teach Arabic-speaking people of how to protect yourself online. And I started using all the resources available online in order to protect myself, and use all the measurements that can prevent anyone from hacking or exposing my IP. However, this wasn't the only way to protect yourself, because after all, I realized that ISIS wouldn't be able to hack me or to expose me online, because I use, as I said, like these kind of like measurements. I could play with the thing that 1 week I report and the other week I remain silent. I confuse them. I speak in the name of a woman. I speak in the name of an old man. I speak in the name of a CIA professional agent. I speak in the name of the MI6 agent. I speak in the name of a Christian, of a Jew, of like I kind of like I confuse the audience.
Yes.
So they don't know who is really speaking, whether it's a one person, a group of people. Is he inside? Is he outside? Is he really a normal citizen, or he is a professional spy? Like I had to confuse them, because I realized that the best way to protect myself online is by protecting myself on the ground, in the reality, by not leading myself to misbehave. The misbehaving here, the misbehavior here would cost me my life. So that's why I took all of these measurements. Like when people speak about ISIS, I give the like the silent eye or the blind eye. I don't communicate about these things. Like even with my family, I do not speak, like to the extent that my family sometimes like, why it seems that you don't have any opinion while you used to be one of the louder speakers before ISIS. So it's kind of like was concerning them. I just like to tell them, like, I want to live my life. I want to continue my life. That's all.
And so then beyond the steps that you had to take online, for your opinions and information to be of any use, the reality was really that you had to go out all the time into the city, right? And one of the most extraordinary things to me is that you said, when you talked about the characters that you had to be different characters. And it was like something, I don't know, out of a novel or something, a spy novel. You had to take on different personas.
Yes, and believe me, it costed me a lot.
Yeah.
Believe me, it's not, I mean, I say it with kind of like, I make it looks like a funny thing in order to forget how horrible it was.
Why? Because the characters kind of, you became the characters in some sense, or because of what you witnessed?
Because imagine, it's beside what you had to witness, beside what I had to witness. Imagine that at certain points, you forget who you are.
Yes.
And you start getting confused about your reality, your fake personality. Who is Omar among all of these people?
Yes.
It's confusing.
Well, this is something that does happen psychologically to people who infiltrate violent gangs. It happens, and people really do start to lose themselves. You experienced that in that time?
At one point, I was very close to lose myself.
Yes.
At one point, I mean, beside the psychological risk, it's also the security risk. That, for example, when I use this kind of like religious character, Omar as a religious person who knows many things about Islam and the religion and jihadism, and that you gain their trust, it's just like, as you say, among the mafia, when they see you like really with this kind of like knowledge, expertise, you will get a point that you will have to prove that you are real by joining them.
Yes.
And this is the moment that I was afraid of. I didn't want myself to reach this point. It's like that I will be asked to join them, because what's the alternative? There's no other answer than yes.
Right. That's the question with one answer at that point.
Yes, I mean, you cannot say no.
Yeah.
And if you say yes, it's death. If you say no, it's death.
So eventually you get to the point where you're moment to moment, not you're wondering if somebody is going to finally call your bluff and the whole thing's going to fall apart.
Yes, and then that's why I decided that I should stop.
Yeah.
And I was so tired.
Yeah.
I was so tired that I just wanted to, to finish my life.
Yes.
And that was the idea, the crazy idea, that because all what was on my shoulders was very heavy, that I wanted to lift this off my shoulders, and I decided it's done. As we say in Arabic, khalas, it's done.
Well, you had done this for a year and a half, right?
Yes, and imagine like that. It's
yeah, no, I can't.
I mean, I said like it's done. I'm no more. I'm no more in this. I will not continue. And then I felt like, okay, no more security measures, no more personalities, no more Mosul Eye. I am Omar. I will shave my beard. I will wear like the normal clothes that they violate the so-called Islamic State fashion rules. I'm going to have my tea on the shore of the river of Tigris. I'm going to have a smoke there. I will smoke there. What will they do? They will kill me? Okay, I'm done. Welcome. They can't come and kill me, because death at that moment was the best thing that could happen to me.
That's, yeah. I mean, wow.
But it didn't. Yeah, I mean, at least, I mean, it didn't happen. I wasn't killed, but it made me stronger.
Because you made it through that point, and it's almost like dying and being reborn again.
Absolutely, that's exactly what really happened. As if I already died, and all of this kind of like fear, the tiredness, etc. All of these, like I took them off my shoulders. So as if I was a newborn person. Like I came back to a new life.
And we should say for people too, I mean, we're not talking about just witnessing strict rules and everything. I mean, you witnessed executions in the street. And
yeah, the execution is like, I mean, imagine that you look in the eyes of a person who is being executed, and that you cannot save him,
right?
That you cannot cry, that you cannot shout out, that you cannot say a word, that you are screaming inside, that if this sound comes out, it would destroy all the mountains around of you, yet you remain silent.
Yeah, it's impossible to imagine, but hearing it described like that is, yeah, as horrible a description as I can imagine. And
one of the things that I documented, it was kind of like a tribute to those victims, that I documented their last moments of their life. Is how did this person look? What was his face looking like? Where was he looking? At which side? How his eyes looked? How his shape? I described his body. I described like his personality. It's kind of like I was honoring the memory of that person before he dies. You know yeah. How horrible this idea is, that you are preparing the tribute of a person who didn't die yet.
Yes, right.
But there is no other way. There is no other way to tell this person that I am with you, I am on your side. I wish I can help you, but I can't. The only thing I can do is to document your moment, this moment, so the people in the future would come and read about you, and you are not just a number. You are a human that had dreams, had life, had all of these kind of like crazy ideas, beautiful ideas, like bad things, good things. You were a human.
Yes. And this comes back to your feeling of the ultimate horror being forgetting, that forgetting something like that, or someone being
forgetting here in this context is a crime.
Right. Yes. And so this brings me to this other question of, I mean, one of the more disturbing things that I heard you say in another interview, I think, was, you know, ISIS kind of comes into town, but it's not just them coming into town. You witnessed, you bumped into people who used to be friends or teachers who had joined the cause, so to speak, as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of them was my student.
Right.
And I saw my student who was telling me just a few months before the city was occupied that he would also love to become a professor of history. He loves history. He wants to be like a professor. He wants to continue his studies. And all of a sudden, I see this boy, an ISIS member in the street, and that I am afraid of him.
Do you have a sense of what motivated some people to be enthusiastic about joining? I mean, is it just the hope of order and security, or is it something else that attracts people?
I mean, it differs. It differs from each individual and also groups. But I could put it in three main lines based on what I witnessed. Is that number one, those who were really ideological, like they believed in all of this, like horrible things. I mean, they believed in it. One of them would say that I would find it like easy for me to kill 1,000 persons for the sake of protecting the idea of the caliphate. He said I wouldn't, like my eyes wouldn't blink. I mean, he said like I would kill 1,000 persons.
Yeah.
So he really believes in the idea. He believes in this ideology. The second is those who found it like, who took advantage of the situation. It's kind of like the authority that ISIS gave them. It's like the power, like you have authority over people. You know how this kind of like they fancy this idea of authority. Who wouldn't accept like this kind of like of having the ultimate and the power over the people? Like it's a very like attracting thing. And then you have those, I will make it 4, not 3. And then you have those who didn't know anything about what's happening, and they just want like, okay, why not? Let me just join. I mean, I would call them like those who were like really, like they were stupid. I mean, they didn't have any intellectual thinking, so they just joined.
It came along and they just joined, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, they didn't. If they might even be not that religious people. They don't probably even they didn't even pray. It's like okay, if someone joined, why shouldn't I? So it's like those who didn't have any idea of what was happening, and then you have those who actually found it a very important opportunity to enrich yourself.
Yeah.
Because
So
ISIS was providing really like good sources, financial resources. So those who wanted to enrich like the warlords. And of course, there are many other reasons if we go deep into the story itself. But I couldn't find in any of those 4 different groups, where should I put my student? Because he wasn't any of them.
Right. Yeah. What was it? You never really could figure out what exactly.
Yes, and I still he by the way was killed in one of the battles.
Wow.
I couldn't like. Did he had a nightmare? Did he had like a crazy idea? Did he just make a mistake and he found himself in the middle of this organization and there is no way back? There is no way out. I don't know. I don't want to justify what he did, but I really wish that I could take him out of this. But at that time, he was the one with the weapon, and I didn't have anything.
In the midst of all of this this terrible moment, or this terrible period of time in the Frontline documentary. There's a wonderful point where a woman called I think Tahani Saleh,
Yes,
who's also a fellow citizen of Mosul. She comes into the documentary and she talks about, a woman quite a lot to lose in this new regime, feels like she's been entirely abandoned by her country, by the world. And she finds Mosul Eye online. And when she described what it was like, she really didn't have words. She almost couldn't talk because it was just the appearance of hope in the midst of what otherwise seemed to be a hopeless situation. The idea that somebody else was out there thinking the same thoughts. The entire world hadn't gone completely insane, right?
You know that I was as surprised as you are when I watched the documentary.
Oh, really?
Because I didn't have this kind of like clear idea of what really Mosul Eye meant to the people of Mosul until I watched the documentary, and until I hear Tahani say what she said, that Mosul Eye really meant hope to them, meant the light to them. And this was my ultimate reward. I mean, if the people of Mosul felt that Mosul Eye was their hope, then like this is the only reward I would take with me in my next life, that I would always feel happy that I did this, no matter what the cost was. I would always feel happy that I helped the people. I was something important to them, not myself as a person, but the idea of Mosul Eye that meant to them something, that gave them the courage to speak out, that gave them the hope in this kind of like darkness, and that showed them the light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, it was a lot. I mean, it clearly kept some people going, and it kept a fire going that,
yes,
again, for it to go out would have been the end.
Yeah, I started receiving messages from the people of Mosul after I revealed my identity. Like, they were saying really things that I never believed that I would hear them. Like they would say, like, I cannot browse Mosul Eye, so what I do is I call my relative in Baghdad and send a coded message asking them to check Mosul Eye and then get back to me with the information so I know what's happening in Mosul.
Yes.
And tell you that we are both living in Mosul.
Yes. So this brings me to a next portion where we can talk about, well, this is kind of an acknowledgement of, even in the midst of this terrible violence and this dark period, that really in the city there's all of these good, humane, decent souls that are kind of sitting there and waiting and hoping. And it makes me want to ask you just a bit about the culture and the art and the literature of Mosul, and what you find about your home city that is so unique and so interesting. Is there something when you think of Mosul in terms of its culture, its art, or its literature, or its poetry, that you immediately think of?
Yes, I mean, Mosul is very ancient city.
Yeah.
It has probably witnessed, or the history stayed with Mosul more than any other city around it, because we have the prehistory, the Assyrian Empire, and then the Assyrians were defeated in 612 BC, and then they moved on the other side of the river and they started building Mosul, and then Mosul went through like more than 300 invasions, etc. Yet the city always survives.
Yeah,
that's the thing, like, about Mosul, that any other city that would have witnessed what Mosul witnessed, occupations, destruction, famines, many other things. Like Honako himself came to Mosul, and Timur-Link, they all came to Mosul. You have nations like the Black Sheep, the White Sheep, the Seljuks, the Ottomans, the Sassanids, the Medes, and go back on in the history, like the Abbasids, they committed a massacre. When we say 3,000 people were killed in the 10th century, like the city had like about like, let's say like 25,000 people, like 3,000 is a big number at that time. So the Abbasid Caliphate committed a massacre, yet they survived. The city was destroyed to the ground, and it survived. What I see about Mosul, what makes me always proud of Mosul, is that this soul and this spirit of resilience that exists within the spirit of the people of Mosul. Once you are from Mosul, you are forever from Mosul. No matter what history do to you, you will always find your way out, and you will always beat the history by re-establishing your narrative. That's on in terms of the resilience of the city. But if we come to the other things, like Mosul is also known of establishing the Arabic music, Ibrahim al-Mosuli and his son Ishaq al-Mosuli and his son Ibrahim al-Mosuli in the 10th century and the Abbasid period. And then you have Ziryab, who became the symbol of Spanish music during the time when it was Andalusia, yet Spain is still celebrating Ziryab. He was from Mosul.
Wow.
His teacher was very jealous of him, so he had to flee to Baghdad, and then from Baghdad to Spain. And then you have the school of Mosul that is known historically around the world as the school of the metal school of Mosul, because Mosul was known since the 13th century of producing the most beautiful handmade metalwork, like kind of like the candle handlers, the ewers, the many other beautiful objects that the 3D technology itself cannot produce them. But at that time they were produced by hand. I mean, those like artisans. Mosul is also known of its diversity. Although we witnessed through the history this kind of like deportation of the Jewish population, which I am trying very hard now to reintroduce and to reclaim the Jewish memory of Mosul. We should, because when we believe in diversity, it's not enough. I learned something from my American professor who lives in a retired community building in State College. He said once when I visited them there, I met with tens of retired historians living in this building. He said, we have diversity here, but we also have inclusion, because inclusion is very important. Diversity itself is not enough. He said, like many of us are Democrats, and we have also Republicans, but if we don't have inclusion, we didn't allow the Republicans to sit on the same table with us.
Yes.
So when he told me this idea, I said, what we have until now in Mosul is only the diversity, but we don't have the inclusion. The inclusion means that you should bring everyone in, no matter how different that person is. So that's what Mosul has produced in the past, and it should reproduce again and again.
And what is Mosul? What is your general view of how Mosul is doing right now? Is it in a state of creating again? Is it opening up?
Well, I mean, the situation is very difficult. The destruction is very huge. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
But it's recovering. I mean, I am always very critic. I criticize the reconstruction efforts. I criticize the Iraqi government for its lack of interest and support of Mosul, etc., etc. But when it comes to see the things that are happening now in Mosul, I say there is a recovery. Yes, it's slow, but there is a recovery. And this recovery now is happening in the right way. Why? Because we have the youth movements that are emerging in the city to the extent that, and this is something that's close now, I'm writing an article, I will be publishing this article soon, is about how the old generation of Mosul is feeling threatened by the younger generation. You know, this clash of generations is...
Yeah, that's not a foreign concept to us either. Right?
Yes, this kind of like conflict between the generations. The older generation is very afraid of this openness of the youngest generation. The older generation assumes that the young generation should believe in all what they have believed in the past. But they don't know that the causes of the younger generation are different from theirs. So there's this kind of like, there are channels of communication between the different generations in Mosul, but there are also problems between these generations. But why I am mentioning this, because this means to me that at least we have finally found a peaceful space to communicate.
Yeah, right.
It's okay to disagree, but as long as you have this kind of like peaceful space to communicate. That's why I say Mosul is recovering, because this space is being built, is being established on very solid grounds. The youth are the main actors of this, and I am very proud of them. They have, without any support, they brought all of this kind of like enterprises, entrepreneurship. They are exploring the world as they have never seen it before. It's for them, everything is happening to them now in Mosul is happening for the first time.
Right, yes.
Which is kind of like amusing to see how they are exploring things. I didn't have the chance to enjoy my adulthood, my childhood, but I am happy for them now.
And when I think about, what you described now, and then when I think about the span of time, let's just say the last 20 years, or just say your lifetime, as a person growing up in Mosul and in Iraq in general, I can't help but think of my country's direct involvement over the years. And, I wonder, there's all kinds of things that go on around the world, but in this case, as someone who pays taxes and things like this, I mean, we make whether we agree with with our own government or not, we do support it just by working and existing and so forth. Yes. And I wonder, is there a role for America in the continued development of Iraq, and is there a role for individual Americans in the continued development of Iraq and of Mosul?
Well, I mean, to go directly to one of the critical elements in this is the role of the coalition.
Yeah.
The role of the coalition is fundamental and essential to what's happening in Mosul now. The United States has been one of the major donors to the recovery of Mosul through the US aid. There are many activities from the United States in Mosul. And I know, as far as I know from my communications, because I speak to diplomats, I speak to officials, I know that they have this kind of like interest in supporting Mosul. It requires also from our side, from the side of the government, local government of Mosul, to also show interest in this kind of American support. Diplomacy is the only language here. We should take advantage of and I will always say this to the governor of Mosul, we should take advantage of the current situation and the current interest of the coalition in Mosul. We should develop it rather than pushing them out. And another point, also from security point of view, the existence of the American troops in Mosul, and as I said this once, that you barely feel their existence, by the way. You don't see them on the streets. But nevertheless, they are keeping the balance.
Yeah.
They are protecting the city. Probably themselves do not feel it, but the people feel it. The people of Mosul feel this. That's why we were so upset, we were so afraid, and like it kind of like drove us crazy when we hear that the American troops are leaving again.
Yes. Yeah, because for whether or not a person sympathized with the initial entry in 2003.
Yes, we have to separate this.
There's such a thing as a moral responsibility now, right?
Yes, we have to separate this from what happened in 2003, and also we don't want the mistake of 2011 to happen again.
Yes,
it shouldn't happen again.
What about the individual American? Is there a way of the individual American helping, or just offering friendship to?
I know. At least there is a group of people from the Amish. They are working in Mosul. They have been working there. I know that there are several Americans actually individually working within organizations. We received 6,000 books from a person named called James something. I forgot. I'm sorry, I forgot his name. But he sent 6,000 books from Arizona to Mosul because we launched a project to revive the libraries of the city of Mosul. Yes, there are many Americans who are actually, and you have seen my interview with General David Petraeus.
Yes.
The man is still calling himself Ana Maslawi.
Yes, I noticed that. he was very taken with your city, I guess.
Yes, and I like this. I like that a man in his position, in his reputation, in his all this kind of like service, he is still interested in Mosul. And the man wanted to do something good for Mosul back in 2004. And I've heard this from my professor, who was forced to reject the offer of General Petraeus. Is the only person among the American army who offered the central library of Mosul to digitize all the rare collections of the library, because he told them, like, put aside the terrorism and the conflicts. A natural disaster might happen and destroy all of your library. So yeah. They refused, they rejected the offer. Imagine if we had everything was documented, even if ISIS comes and destroyed the library in 2014 and 16, sorry, we still have the digitized ones. So yeah. That's why I like the idea that Petraeus is calling himself Ana Maslawi. I like this, and I know that there are many Americans who are friends of mine who actually have the same feeling toward Mosul.
Now you're living in Europe, right?
Yes.
And it's interesting to me. I going back through some of your work and remembering when I was reading from Mosul Eye back in whenever it was 2015. I went back to a couple other accounts, and there's I think a historian that you know, or maybe at least met once, Tom Holland, who
yes.
He described how for a documentary he was making, he got within a mile or so of ISIS in Sinjar.
Yes.
And he realized that just down the road a bit, there were people being killed and literally crucified. And he said suddenly it seemed to him as if the ancient world, which he had been writing about for years, and his own world had suddenly collapsed into one present. And he was very overwhelmed by it as being a person from a relatively stable country in England. I wonder, from your perspective, you're a historian who has dealt with this kind of difficulty in horror and violence for a long, sustained time, not just these trips or these moments. And now that you're living in Europe, I wonder, what do you see things in the so-called West that disturb you or just puzzle you?
Yes, I mean, what disturbs me in the West in general is, I don't know, but what I feel is that the West is probably losing its core values and is preparing itself to get into really a dark tunnel. I mean, I hope this will not happen.
Yeah.
But what the West is not realizing is that all the problems are coming back to Europe again.
Yes.
The solutions of the past are not possible today. Europe is still using the old solutions to deal with the problems. And the idea of the unity and the European Union, which I am one, like I have to say, like I am one of the supporters and believers in the idea of the European Union, because otherwise we would have witnessed another war in Europe. It was one of the best achievements of the European intellectual history and political history. But unfortunately, this is being like dismantled slowly, gradually. I was asked once, what is the day after Corona? How do you imagine the world the day after Corona? And I could only imagine the rise of religion again. People are becoming more religious. People are losing faith in science, because thinking is a very tiring process. And unfortunately, the generations, whether in the West or in the East, they have no more ability to spare time for thinking.
Why?
It's a very tiring process because everything is running so fast.
Yes, but people have it was a tiring process in the past too. Why do we not seem to have it in us to?
I don't want to blame the technology.
Yeah.
But I would blame this kind of like the lack of sight. I mean, they are not, I mean, we have this access to everything, yet we don't understand what's happening. I mean, when you put everything in front of your eyes and all the elements are on the table, but you cannot see anything because everything is confusing to you. And you don't know anymore which narrative is the right one, which story is the correct one. Like this idea of trust in yourself, of trust in your thinking, of trust in what's happening and what's happening around you is destabilizing our mentality. And I think it's the time for example, for Europe. It's the time for Europe now also to think about its past, but also about its current crisis of the COVID-19 and what the COVID-19 have actually exposed about the values of humanity in the European society, especially when it comes to the idea that it's okay to sacrifice the elder generation.
Yes.
I mean, it's also like, I remember one of my discussions when I said, like, when the father of Boris Johnson, he said, I will go out, I will go to the pub, I will not listen to my son. I would imagine his father thinking like, I didn't raise my son to do this, to talk about herd immunity. I didn't raise my son to think that it's okay for the older generation to die with corona. And I'm mentioning this example, and I'm referring to all the old generation in Europe. Like those people are witnessing like strange generation. This generation is not what they thought of before. They thought like they are going to produce a generation that respect their values, which seems the same problem in the rest of the world. I mean, there is this kind of like change that is happening. The old generation with the new generation, the fast track movement of the technology in our life. I mean, you see like everything is becoming online. You no more have privacy. You no more have the idea of identity. You no more have the idea of belonging. You no more have all of these old values are changing now. And what only matters, I'm not a communist, I'm not imperialist, I'm none of them, I'm not a capitalist, but it seems to me that Corona is teaching us that, look, the people are dying and all of the countries are caring about is who is going to find the vaccine and which company is going to benefit the most.
Yeah.
While the world should get united to face this problem, but you see how divided they are.
Yeah, it seems like you hope that sometimes in societies that become very rich and somewhat decadent and comfortable, they really, I think they stop believing that they're living in the same world that
Yes.
that people lived in the past. They really genuinely don't believe it.
Which we can call it like, although I don't believe that empires will come back, but
Yes.
this is the age of empires.
Yes, and they're surprised when they feel pain. They're surprised when they feel levels of upheaval.
Yeah, it's kind of like the world is being divided again into like 3 or 4 empires, like this kind of like components, where as an individual you have no value anymore.
Where you have no what?
No value anymore.
Oh, no value. Yeah. That is, yeah. I can see that. So, what are you working on now? I mean, you're in an interesting position because you sort of became known for this very unique and courageous work that you did, and now you're in Europe, as you say, in the middle of Europe going through its own upheaval and the West going through its own upheaval. Are you still? I think you're going. Are you going for a doctorate right now, or what are you working on?
I'm thankfully in the final stage of my PhD.
Wow.
I'm about to finish, but I am teaching. Middle East history. I focus on cultures of Middle East. I also teach cultural heritage at Sciences Po University, and this is the place where I feel happy, safe. And I feel myself. I mean, I feel my real identity as Omar, not Mosul Eye, not that crazy guy. No, it's Omar. Omar is in this. I am in the academia. That's where I belong. And yeah, despite all of this kind of like tiring work, like working on a PhD and teaching at the same time, I still do things for Mosul. I am now in the process of launching a very big project for the reforestation of Mosul to plant 1 million tree. Hopefully it will be launched soon. I'm still supplying the university library with books. I'm still acting as non-official ambassador for Mosul. I make sure that I take Mosul with me wherever I go, and if you even see like my coffee cup has the old Mosul.
Very nice, beautiful.
Yeah, so if you want to see the photo, this is the old Mosul, which is actually, which doesn't exist anymore now. It was destroyed.
All right.
Yes.
Wow.
So I take Mosul with me wherever I go. I'm soon meeting with, hopefully, we'll meet with Pope Francis. Yeah, I mean, to tell him to pray for Mosul. I'm not a religious person, but I know there are many people in Mosul who are religious, who believes in prayers, and I'm just like a messenger who will deliver their message. I care about the people of Mosul. I care about Mosul more than anything else. I love this town. I love the city. I mean, it's kind of like a crazy relation between me and Mosul. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to go back to my normal life. Sometimes I hate being called Mosul Eye, to be honest.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, sometimes I just want to like to shut down everything and like go somewhere where I have no access to the internet or I have no phone. I just like work like kind of like in a normal disconnected from the internet life. So, but then I feel back the responsibility that I accepted, and I tell myself like that I should continue. It's a huge responsibility, but I should continue.
Do you think you will ever return to Mosul?
I wish. I hope this will happen. I hope.
You've been very generous with your time, and I appreciate it, especially considering all of the projects you're currently working on still. Before we go, I wanted to maybe have you mention one more thing or one more story. When I was following you in 2015, 2016, following your website, I felt like whenever I thought of Mosul, and really whenever I thought of Iraq during the ISIS period, I thought of Mosul Eye as a source of hope, and I also thought of a guy who I happened to come across called Amin Moqdad.
Yes, Amin Moqdad is,
who is a musician.
Yeah,
and I wanted you to talk about the concert at Nineveh.
Yes, Amin Moqdad is the musician whom I invited when I organized the musical concert on the the destroyed site of Prophet Junah, which was destroyed by ISIS. It was a crazy story. You can find it on Mosul Eye, that someone known as Mosul Eye contacted Amin Moqdad, telling him, like it was Wednesday, telling him like, would you play music in Mosul again? Would you want to play music in Mosul again? He said, who are you? I told him, it doesn't matter. Yes or no? He said, yes. I told him, okay, where are you now? He said, I'm Baghdad. I told him, you have to be in Mosul. He said, I cannot drive from Baghdad to Mosul because it was during the battle, and the east side of Mosul was liberated, but the west was still under ISIS occupation. I told him, okay. Then I prepared some stuff for him. I booked the flight for him from Baghdad to Erbil, and then I prepared someone to pick him from Erbil to take him to Mosul to play the music, which he did.
Yeah, it's just a nice little insight, I think, into people who have a dream and who have an idea of being able to return to a place that had been taken over by.
Yeah, and the funniest part of all of this is that the people say that playing music on the shrine of Prophet Junah, or as known Yunus, is probably the best thing that ever happened in his whole life. Yeah, this is the best thing happened to him in his whole life, because I mean, according to the methodologies and the mysteries, etc., and the story of him, that he was swallowed by the whale. And yeah, I mean, so when you play music for him, this could be like the best thing could ever happen to him.
he was listening somewhere
Yeah,
from
yeah.
down below. Yeah. Omar, thank you very much for talking with
My
me
pleasure.
today and for giving your time. It's wonderful to see somebody who has a love of history, but whether you didn't choose it really, but it's not just an academic love. You're kind of suffused through and through with the history of a particular place. And well, the world is lucky that people like you
Thank
pop
you.
up all over the world. and and I want to thank you for coming on, and I wish you good luck. And anytime that you need more books for the library in Mosul, or anytime you think that Americans and people can help in certain ways the city of Mosul, don't be a stranger.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Stay safe.
You too.
Bye.